Picture this. You wake up one morning to find orange construction cones blocking your own driveway and a notice from your HOA claiming they're taking possession of the property you've been parking on for 15 years. That's exactly what happened to Sarah Mitchell, a 42-year-old teacher from Willowbrook Estates, when her power-hungry HOA decided to wage war over 18 inches of asphalt. But here's where it gets absolutely wild. Not only did Sarah fight back, she uncovered a web of corruption, illegal land grabs, and financial misconduct that would make your head spin. By the time she was done, 3 board members had resigned in disgrace. The HOA faced a class action lawsuit, and Sarah walked away with a settlement that would make Judge Judy herself applaud. Where are you watching from? Please feel free to leave a comment below, as you are about to witness one of the most outrageous HOA power trips you've ever seen, and the absolutely brilliant revenge that followed. Trust me, you're going to want to hear every single detail of how one determined homeowner brought down an entire corrupt HOA board. This isn't just another neighbor dispute. This is a masterclass in standing up to bullies who think they can steal your property right out from under you. And wait until you hear what Sarah discovered hidden in the HOA's financial records. Sarah Mitchell thought she had found her forever home when she moved into Willowbrook Estates in 2008. The suburban development in Colorado Springs boasted tree-lined streets, well-maintained common areas, and what seemed like a reasonable HOA fee of $200 per month. As a third-grade teacher with a modest salary, Sarah had saved for years to afford the $280,000 ranch-style home at 1247 Maple Grove Lane. The house came with a standard 2-car garage and a driveway that extended exactly 18 inches beyond the garage door. Nothing unusual for the neighborhood. Sarah's real estate agent had specifically mentioned that the extra driveway space was perfect for guests or her small Honda Civic when she needed quick access without opening the garage. For 15 blissful years, Sarah parked there without a single complaint from anyone. Willowbrook Estates was governed by the Willowbrook Community Association, led by a 5-member board that met monthly in the community center. For most of Sarah's time there, the HOA functioned relatively smoothly. Sure, there were occasional disputes about fence heights or unapproved mailbox colors, but nothing too dramatic. The biggest controversy in the neighborhood's history had been a heated debate over whether residents could plant vegetables in their front yards. But everything changed in early 2022 when Margaret Thornfield was elected as the new HOA president. Margaret was a retired corporate attorney who had moved to Willowbrook just 2 years prior, purchasing the largest home in the development for $450,000. She immediately made her presence known by attending every board meeting, scrutinizing every expense, and volunteering for multiple committees. Some residents appreciated her attention to detail and legal expertise. Others found her intensity overwhelming. When the previous president stepped down due to health issues, Margaret ran unopposed and won by default. Her campaign platform focused on fiscal responsibility and strict enforcement of community standards. She promised to restore order to what she claimed was a neighborhood sliding into chaos. Margaret's first act as president was to hire her own property management company, Thornfield Associates, to handle day-to-day HOA operations. The fact that she owned the company didn't concern the other board members who trusted her legal background and business acumen. After all, she promised to provide services at a discounted rate. Her second major initiative was to conduct what she called a comprehensive property audit of every home in the development. Margaret claimed that years of lax enforcement had allowed numerous violations to go unaddressed, potentially impacting property values and community aesthetics. She hired a surveying company to create detailed plot maps of every lot, measuring everything from fence placement to driveway dimensions. Sarah first heard about the audit through the neighborhood email newsletter. Like most residents, she assumed it was just administrative busywork, the kind of thing attorneys love to do to justify their existence. She had no reason to worry. Her property had been professionally landscaped, her fence was well within setback requirements, and her home's exterior was meticulously maintained. The surveying team spent 2 weeks in the neighborhood, using laser measuring devices and taking detailed photographs. Sarah watched them work from her kitchen window, noting how thorough they were being. Some neighbors complained about the invasion of privacy, but Margaret assured everyone that the audit was necessary to protect their investments. 3 months later, Sarah received a letter that would change everything. The letter, on official Willowbrook Community Association letterhead, was dated October 15, 2022, and marked Urgent Property Violation Notice. Sarah's hands trembled slightly as she opened it, expecting perhaps a minor issue about her garden gnomes or the small crack in her sidewalk she'd been meaning to repair. Instead, she found herself reading the most absurd document of her life. According to the letter, signed by Margaret Thornfield herself, Sarah's driveway extended 18 inches beyond the legal boundaries of her property. This encroachment, as Margaret called it, violated multiple sections of the community covenants and needed to be remedied immediately. The letter demanded that Sarah remove the unauthorized concrete structure within 30 days or face daily fines of $100. But here's where it gets truly unbelievable. And this is where you need to pay close attention because this detail becomes crucial later in our story. Sarah read the letter 3 times before the absurdity fully sank in. 18 inches of driveway, the same driveway that had been there when she bought the house 15 years ago, the same driveway that appeared on every official survey and property document she'd ever received, was suddenly being declared an illegal encroachment. Her first call was to her original real estate agent, Tom Bradley, who still worked in the area. Tom was as baffled as Sarah. He pulled up the original listing photos and property surveys from 2008, all clearly showing the driveway in its current configuration. The mortgage company, insurance company, and county assessor had all accepted these measurements without question for over a decade. "Sarah, this doesn't make sense," Tom told her over the phone. "I've sold dozens of homes in Willowbrook, and they all have similar driveway configurations. If yours is illegal, then half the neighborhood is in violation." That's exactly what Sarah was thinking. She decided to take a walk through the development, really looking at driveways for the first time. What she discovered made her blood boil. At least 20 other homes had driveways that extended beyond their garage doors by similar or even greater distances. Some extended 2 or 3 feet beyond what hers did. But here's where things get interesting. And this is where Sarah started to suspect something fishy was going on. Every single house that had received a violation notice was owned by residents who had in some way opposed Margaret's presidency or questioned her decisions. Sarah remembered now that she had spoken up at the previous month's board meeting about the rising HOA fees under Margaret's management. She had asked for a detailed breakdown of expenses and questioned why legal fees had tripled since Margaret took office. Sarah wasn't the only one receiving these letters. Over the next few days, she connected with 7 other homeowners who had received similar violation notices for various encroachments, mailboxes supposedly 6 inches too close to the street, garden borders allegedly extending onto common areas, and fence posts supposedly placed 1 foot over property lines. The pattern was becoming clear, but Sarah needed proof. She decided to fight back, starting with the most obvious approach, requesting a formal review of her case. According to the HOA covenants, any homeowner could challenge a violation notice by requesting a hearing before the full board. Sarah submitted her written request within the required 5-day window, including copies of all her original property documents. Margaret's response came swiftly and was dripping with condescension. The hearing was scheduled for November 20th, but Margaret's letter made it clear that this was merely a formality. The surveying company's measurements were definitive proof of the violation, and Sarah's historical use of the space was irrelevant to current enforcement standards. But Margaret made one crucial mistake in that letter. She mentioned that the HOA intended to reclaim all improperly used common area space for the benefit of the community. This phrase would become the smoking gun that exposed the entire scheme. Sarah spent the 3 weeks before her hearing doing something Margaret clearly hadn't expected: actual research. As a teacher, Sarah knew how to investigate, gather evidence, and build a compelling case. What she uncovered was far worse than simple harassment. First, she obtained copies of the original development plans from the county recorder's office. These 2003 blueprints clearly showed that her driveway, and dozens of others like it, were designed and built exactly as they currently existed. The developer had received full approval for these configurations from both the county and the original HOA board. Second, she discovered that Margaret's surveying company, Rocky Mountain Property Solutions, had been incorporated just 6 months before the audit began. The owner was listed as Michael Thornfield, Margaret's son. The company had no previous projects and no other clients besides the Willowbrook Community Association. Third, and most damning, Sarah filed a Freedom of Information Act request for all HOA financial records for the past 2 years. What she found in those documents would make your jaw drop. Since Margaret took office, the HOA had paid over $45,000 to various consulting firms and legal services, all companies that traced back to Margaret or her immediate family members. The property management fees paid to Thornfield Associates had increased by 300% compared to the previous company, despite providing fewer services. But the real bombshell was hidden in the meeting minutes from a closed executive session held just 2 weeks after the survey was completed. Sarah had to threaten legal action to obtain these records, but what she found was worth the effort. In that meeting, Margaret had proposed a community improvement initiative that would involve reclaiming improperly used spaces throughout the development and converting them into revenue-generating amenities. The plan included removing unauthorized driveways and replacing them with paid parking spots that would generate additional HOA income. Let me repeat that. Margaret planned to steal pieces of residents' driveways and then charge them money to park in spaces they had already owned for decades. Sarah now had evidence of a conspiracy, but she needed to be smart about how she used it. The board hearing was her opportunity to expose everything publicly, but she had to be strategic. Margaret was a lawyer, after all, and would try to discredit or dismiss any accusations. The night before the hearing, Sarah received an unexpected phone call that would change everything once again. "Ms. Mitchell, this is Robert Chen. I used to serve on the HOA board before Margaret took over. I heard about your situation, and there's something you need to know before tomorrow's meeting." Robert had served as the HOA treasurer for 6 years before Margaret's election. He had resigned abruptly just 3 months into Margaret's presidency, citing irreconcilable differences with the board's direction. But he had been quietly documenting everything that happened after his resignation. "Margaret isn't just going after random homeowners," Robert explained. "She's targeting specific properties that she wants to acquire for a development project. That 18 inches of your driveway? It's part of a larger plan to create a connected parking area that she intends to lease to a commercial snow removal company she's partnering with." The pieces were falling into place. This wasn't just harassment or even simple corruption. It was a calculated real estate scheme designed to steal valuable property from unsuspecting homeowners. But here's where our story takes yet another dramatic turn, because Sarah was about to discover that Margaret had made one enormous miscalculation. The board meeting on November 20th was packed like Sarah had never seen before. Word had spread through the neighborhood about the violation notices and Margaret's heavy-handed tactics. Nearly 60 residents showed up at the community center, filling every chair and lining the walls. Margaret called the meeting to order with her usual air of authority, but Sarah could see something different in her demeanor. The HOA president seemed nervous, constantly shuffling papers and avoiding eye contact with the crowd. She had clearly expected a routine rubber stamp hearing, not a neighborhood uprising. "We're here to address the property violation appeal submitted by Sarah Mitchell of 1247 Maple Grove Lane," Margaret announced, her voice carrying less confidence than usual. "The homeowner has requested a hearing regarding the encroachment violation identified during our recent property audit." Sarah stood up, carrying a thick folder of documents and a laptop computer. She had prepared for this moment like she was defending her dissertation, and she was ready for war. "Thank you, Mrs. Thornfield. Before I address my specific case, I'd like to present some information that I believe the community deserves to hear." Margaret immediately tried to cut her off. "Ms. Mitchell, this hearing is specifically about your property violation. We're not here to discuss broader community issues." But Sarah was ready for this tactic. She had studied the HOA bylaws more thoroughly than Margaret apparently had. According to Article 12, Section 4 of our community bylaws, any homeowner appealing a violation has the right to present all relevant evidence and context that relates to their case. What I'm about to show you is directly relevant to the legitimacy and motivation behind these violation notices. The room fell silent as Sarah connected her laptop to the community center's projector. On the screen appeared the original 2003 development plans, clearly showing her driveway configuration as part of the approved design. "This is the original blueprint filed with El Paso County when our neighborhood was developed. As you can see, my driveway, and 23 others just like it, were built exactly as designed and approved by both the county and the original HOA board." Margaret's face was already reddening, but Sarah was just getting started. "Now, let's look at who conducted the survey that allegedly found these violations." The next slide showed the corporate filing documents for Rocky Mountain Property Solutions, with Michael Thornfield clearly listed as the owner. A murmur went through the crowd as people began to understand what they were seeing. For those who don't know, Michael Thornfield is Mrs. Thornfield's son. So our HOA president hired her own son's company to conduct a survey that coincidentally found violations requiring expensive remediation work. Margaret shot to her feet. "This is completely inappropriate. You're making baseless accusations and—" "I'm presenting facts," Sarah interrupted, her teacher's voice cutting through Margaret's protests. "And I'm just getting started." The next series of slides showed the financial records Sarah had obtained through her FOIA request. The payments to various Thornfield companies were highlighted in bright red, showing a clear pattern of self-dealing that had cost the HOA tens of thousands of dollars. But the real bombshell came when Sarah displayed the meeting minutes from the executive session. This document, which I had to threaten legal action to obtain, shows that Mrs. Thornfield proposed converting our reclaimed driveway spaces into paid parking for a commercial snow removal company. In other words, she planned to steal pieces of our property and then rent them to her business partners. The room erupted. Neighbors who had been quietly tolerating Margaret's authoritarian style were now seeing the full scope of her scheme. Several people were on their phones, presumably calling spouses to tell them what was happening. Margaret was frantically whispering with the other board members, but Sarah wasn't done yet. "There's more. I've also discovered that Mrs. Thornfield has been using HOA funds to pay for personal legal services, inflating management fees paid to her own company and authorizing expenditures without proper board approval, all violations of both our community covenants and Colorado state law." At this point, one of the other board members, Patricia Williams, stood up and addressed Margaret directly. "Margaret, is this true? Did you really plan to take residents' driveways for a commercial parking scheme?" Before Margaret could answer, another voice called out from the back of the room. "Mrs. Thornfield, this is Detective James Rodriguez with the El Paso County Sheriff's Office. We've received a complaint about potential fraud and embezzlement. I'm going to need to speak with you after this meeting." The room went dead silent. Sarah hadn't expected this development. Apparently, someone else had been investigating Margaret's activities and had decided tonight was the perfect time to act. Margaret's composure finally cracked completely. Her face went white, then red, then white again. She looked around the room like a trapped animal, realizing that her carefully constructed scheme was collapsing in real time. This is all a misunderstanding," she stammered. "The board has always acted in the best interests of the community. These accusations are documented with your own signatures and meeting minutes," Sarah finished. Everything I've shown tonight came from official HOA records that you created and approved. Patricia Williams, who had served on the board longer than anyone, called for an immediate vote of no confidence in Margaret's leadership. The motion was seconded instantly by another board member, and within minutes, Margaret Thornfield was removed from her position as HOA president by a unanimous vote of the remaining board members. But the evening wasn't over yet. Detective Rodriguez approached the microphone and addressed the crowd. Based on the evidence we've seen tonight, we'll be conducting a full investigation into the financial management of this HOA. We encourage any residents who believe they have been affected by fraudulent violations or improper fees to contact our office. As the meeting broke up, neighbors swarmed around Sarah, thanking her for having the courage to fight back and expose what had been happening. But Sarah knew this was just the beginning of a much larger battle. Margaret, meanwhile, had quietly slipped out the back door of the community center, but her problems were beginning. The weeks following the explosive board meeting moved at lightning speed. Detective Rodriguez's investigation uncovered even more evidence of financial misconduct than Sarah had initially discovered. Margaret had embezzled over $120,000 from the HOA's reserve funds through her various shell companies and inflated contracts. Within 2 weeks, Margaret Thornfield was arrested and charged with multiple counts of fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy. Her son Michael faced similar charges for his role in the fraudulent surveying scheme. The local news picked up the story, and it became a cautionary tale about HOA corruption that was shared across social media platforms. But here's where Sarah's story gets even more satisfying. The new interim HOA board, led by Patricia Williams, immediately reversed all of Margaret's violation notices and voted to refund every penny of the improper fines that had been collected. They also launched their own forensic audit of the association's finances, which revealed additional irregularities dating back to Margaret's first month in office. Sarah, meanwhile, wasn't content to clear her own name. She had uncovered evidence that Margaret's scheme would have affected dozens of families, and she felt a responsibility to make sure justice was fully served. She contacted a class action attorney who specialized in HOA disputes and helped organize a lawsuit on behalf of all affected homeowners. The case against Margaret and the Willowbrook Community Association made headlines across Colorado and became a landmark example of HOA reform. The lawsuit alleged fraud, breach of fiduciary duty, and violations of Colorado's common interest community laws. More importantly, it sought not just financial damages, but structural reforms to prevent similar abuses in the future. Margaret's legal troubles multiplied quickly. In addition to the criminal charges and civil lawsuit, the Colorado State Licensing Board launched an investigation into her law practice. Several of her other clients came forward with complaints about overcharging and unauthorized fees, suggesting that her fraudulent behavior extended far beyond the HOA scheme. The class action lawsuit was settled 18 months later for $2.8 million, the largest HOA fraud settlement in Colorado history. Sarah, as the lead plaintiff who had exposed the entire scheme, received $185,000, enough to pay off her mortgage and fund her daughter's college education. But more importantly to Sarah, the settlement required the implementation of strict financial oversight measures and transparency requirements for all HOA operations in the development. Margaret Thornfield ultimately pleaded guilty to multiple felony charges and was sentenced to 4 years in state prison. She was also required to pay full restitution to the HOA and lost her law license permanently. Her son, Michael, received 2 years of probation and was banned from operating any property-related businesses in Colorado. The story didn't end there, though. Sarah's courage in standing up to corruption inspired other homeowners across the country who were dealing with similar issues. She began speaking at community meetings and HOA conferences, sharing her experience and teaching other residents how to recognize and fight back against abuse of power. The Colorado State Legislature even took notice. Sarah was invited to testify before a committee considering new HOA reform legislation, and her case was cited as a key example of why stronger oversight and transparency requirements were needed. The resulting law, which passed with bipartisan support, is informally known as the Sarah Mitchell Act and provides new protections for homeowners facing fraudulent HOA violations. But perhaps the most satisfying outcome of all was what happened to Sarah's infamous 18 inches of driveway. The new HOA board officially granted easements to every homeowner whose property had been targeted by Margaret's scheme, ensuring that no future board could ever again try to steal portions of residents' driveways. Sarah still lives in the same house at 1247 Maple Grove Lane, and she still parks in those same 18 inches of driveway that started this whole ordeal. But now that space represents something much more significant than just a place to park. Her car. It's a symbol of what one determined person can accomplish when they refuse to back down from bullies and corruption. The Willowbrook Community Association is now considered a model of transparency and fiscal responsibility. They publish detailed financial reports quarterly. All board meetings are recorded and available online, and major expenditures require approval from the full community. Property values in the neighborhood have actually increased since Margaret's departure, as potential buyers see the reforms as a selling point rather than a concern. Sarah has since been elected to the HOA board herself, where she serves as treasurer and chairs the accountability committee. She's implemented many of the oversight measures that could have prevented Margaret's scheme from succeeding in the first place. Under her leadership, the association has built up healthy financial reserves while actually reducing monthly fees for residents. The community center where that explosive board meeting took place now has a small plaque near the entrance that reads, "In appreciation of community members who stand up for transparency and accountability." It doesn't mention Sarah by name, but everyone in the neighborhood knows exactly who it refers to. Looking back on the experience, Sarah says the most important lesson she learned was that corruption thrives in darkness and dies in sunlight. Margaret's entire scheme depended on residents staying quiet, accepting authority without question, and not asking uncomfortable questions about money and motives. The moment I decided to fight back and shine a light on what was really happening, the whole thing started to unravel, Sarah reflects. Bullies and con artists count on people being too intimidated or too busy to challenge them. But when you stand up and demand answers, you'd be amazed how quickly their house of cards comes tumbling down. Sarah's advice for anyone dealing with similar HOA issues is simple. Document everything, know your rights, and don't be afraid to ask hard questions. If your HOA board gets angry when you request financial records or question their decisions, that's usually a red flag that something isn't right. Honest leaders welcome transparency because they have nothing to hide. The ripple effects of Sarah's courage continue to spread. Homeowners across the country have reached out to her for advice on fighting their own HOA battles, and several have successfully exposed similar corruption schemes using the strategies Sarah pioneered. She's helped create an informal network of HOA reformers who share information and support each other as efforts to bring accountability to community associations. Margaret Thornfield, meanwhile, was released from prison after serving 3.5 years of her sentence. She now works as a paralegal in a small law firm in Wyoming, earning a fraction of what she used to make and prohibited from ever serving on an HOA board again. Her grand scheme to get rich by stealing neighbors' driveways cost her everything: her career, her freedom, her reputation, and her financial security. As for that 18 inches of driveway that started it all, it's still there, still serving its original purpose, now legally protected by easement and community covenant. But every time Sarah parks her car there, she's reminded that standing up to corruption and abuse of power is not just about protecting your own interests. It's about protecting your entire community from those who would exploit their positions for personal gain. So the next time someone in a position of authority tries to bully you with bogus rules or steal what is rightfully yours, remember Sarah Mitchell and her 18 inches of driveway. Sometimes the smallest battles can lead to the biggest victories, and one person's courage to say no can change everything for everyone. What would you have done in Sarah's situation? Would you have fought back against such obvious corruption, or would you have just paid the fine to make the problem go away? And more importantly, how carefully are you watching your own HOA board's activities? Because if Sarah's story teaches us anything, it's that corruption can happen anywhere, and it's up to all of us to stay vigilant and hold our leaders accountable.